What mechanisms are triggered when you share your luck or your problems with a large number of people? Can this somehow be used? With illnesses, dreams, desires?
Well, we can go into more detail. When a person is about to perform some action, a portion of energy is allocated for it, a portion of consciousness. That's always the case. Moreover, it can be allocated well in advance, or it can be allocated at the very moment when a person just begins to perform the action, and at that moment, this comes to them. An energy packet. If, at that moment, after receiving this energy packet, a person starts directing their attention outward and actively keeps it there, and this happens precisely when they begin telling everyone about it, then this portion of consciousness flows into those people to whom they are telling everything, the ones they are focusing their attention on. As a result, he loses this energy packet, his productivity drops, his effectiveness in moving forward decreases. In other words, he no longer has the resources to achieve this result, and so he doesn't achieve it. The same thing happens when a person, for example, encounters a situation that crystallizes him, a problematic situation, a situation that starts to suffocate him. Again, we crystallize our own consciousness. We don't crystallize something that doesn't belong to us. We simply don't have that ability. We can only manage what is ours. So, for example, when a person encounters a problematic situation and starts telling everyone about it, he begins to distribute this crystallization onto the attention of those people who are watching him at that moment. If these people happen to be more relaxed, more at ease, and that's usually the case, especially when people even take pleasure in your problems, meaning they're even more receptive, they can at that moment resonate with your crystallizations, and these crystallizations gradually dissolve. That's why the problem also disappears. In other words, this spasm starts to spread out among many people, and for many people it's easy to relax this spasm. Because let's be honest, on a global scale, none of us really care about each other. That's why when one person has a problem, it's very rare for another person to feel it the same way and tense up just as much. No, for the most part, they'll say, I don't have those kinds of problems, and that's wonderful. But once they come into contact with the problem, they start to relax it with their own relaxed state. The same thing can happen with illnesses, but in most cases, there won't be a cure. There will just be some relief of the condition. Because after all, illness is a mechanism that saves our lives. And if you get carried away with these things, you might end up in a coffin before your time. But this also applies to illnesses, though it doesn't work as effectively there. You need to interact with very fiery people, with very fast people. Then illnesses can be greatly alleviated, let's put it that way.
What is dementia from an energetic point of view? Nowadays, it's quite common.
Mainly, people who start having such problems with their physical body are already preparing to depart. They gradually shift their consciousness into the body of second attention. But accordingly, the body of first attention begins to fade and lose its functionality. Therefore, in most cases, this is a process of transitioning to the afterlife. It's just that it happens slowly, it happens systematically, and from the outside it looks like dementia, that is, a loss of connection with the surrounding material world. But this does not change the fact that, of course, the physical body is damaged, the physical body is losing its functionality. If the physical body were healthy and strong, the person would be able to function simultaneously, both in the material world and in the body of second attention, that is, in the world where energy prevails. And because people do not practice, people do not relax, do not accelerate, their consciousness simply, quite plainly, is not enough. And since a person subconsciously understands perfectly well where things are heading, they allocate their resources and functionality differently. At the physical level, it is simply lost.
What is consciousness from your point of view?
Consciousness, from my point of view, is the original itself, it is its body, it is its nature. And accordingly, consciousness, which is manifested as a ray of intention in every living being, is that very fragment which at the very least makes every person a part of the original. Therefore, consciousness in its original state is exactly that. Shiva, that is the primary cause of everything. Then this consciousness begins its path of transformation. And eventually it can even reach the state of matter. That is, matter is highly crystallized consciousness. Therefore, everything that surrounds us is some form of transformation, iteration, and cooling of this consciousness. If a person comes into contact with this too much, they also become cooled down. And to neutralize this process, one needs to come into contact with something hotter than matter. The best option is one's own soul and the deity in the heart.
Tell me about the vortex in the heart. It appeared before sleep, after a shock. A powerful vortex in the chest, without pain, just the sensation of a spinning flame. The body was paralyzed. The energy spread throughout the entire body. After that, the world seemed unreal. What is this, and what should I do if it happens again?
This state is called sleep paralysis. This state precedes an out-of-body experience when consciousness gradually detaches from the physical sense organs and begins to perceive the world through the body of second attention. Accordingly, when consciousness detaches from the sense organs and begins to perceive reality through energy, energetic processes become very pronounced, noticeable. Yes, our heart is also in a vortex, and in fact we have many of them. There are vortices on the body, and the fact that it was noticed and discovered is wonderful. The real challenge here is that this is just a one-time experience. Ideally, an individual ought to learn how to live in such a state of perception, so that there is no boundary between, to put it in relatively simple terms, sleep and wakefulness. And it is precisely practices that allow these two states to be united, not in the sense that one turns off and the other turns on, but rather that they are both present in life simultaneously. In other words, a person becomes, roughly speaking, a psychic, and first and foremost a psychic of their own energy. One should strive to enter these states. One should strive to grow into them. One should consistently strive for these states, to become deeply and firmly rooted in everyday life. Naturally, there should be no resistance at all. On the contrary, in your regular daily routine, you should try to access the specific state experienced during sleep paralysis, and merge these two processes together. This is the merging of the first and second attention. And under no circumstances should you settle for experiencing this state just once, because one-time experiences do not allow us to become practitioners. They create even more illusions that you have achieved something. This is the enemy called clarity. That is, when a person manages to do something once, they think, that's it, now I can do it. But no, it was simply experienced once, and at this moment it is not accessible. And this also needs to be acknowledged. And when a person continues to practice, when they keep making efforts, eventually they merge these two states, and they become accessible at all times. And this is a good achievement for a practitioner.
How do I properly show the egregore, whose sphere I work in, the vibrations of the 108th and other centers?
Gently and without expression. Because if you ignite the centers below, say from the 1st to the 108th, at some point it will simply disconnect and you won't be able to do anything. Just gradually open them, loosen them, relax them, shift your attention there, and let these energies flow as they should. And then the egregore will notice that it is gaining access to those energies. Energies it cannot access through other people. Accordingly, your value will immediately increase in its eyes, in the eyes of this egregore.
And if at all levels there are slackers wasting their lives, what exactly will happen to the human soul after their death?
Nothing will happen to the soul. The soul does not depend on them in any way. They will simply fall away just like ripe berries from a bush, or heavy apples from a tall tree. The tree itself does not suffer at all when the ripe apples fall away from it. New bodies will grow. Not again. If nothing works out, the bodies are discarded, the fragments of consciousness move on, and the soul, it remains as it is. The soul is unshakable in relation to all these processes.
Today, out on the street among the falling snow, I saw 2 black dots slowly rising upward. Are those the very ones from the first gate?
Most likely what you noticed. Other forms of life, which I call inorganic beings, can also be perceived as certain black clumps of energy. The black dots that come from the first gate, the 7th ones, they mostly don't fly off in different directions. They are immediately sucked into some gate, but mainly into the 7th gate. Although they can also be sucked into the 5th or the 4th, it varies. But here, most likely what was perceived was precisely inorganic beings. There are actually quite a lot of them. But when a person stands up abruptly, that's a bit different. That doesn't relate to energy, but rather it's more about our eyes, about physics.
What happens to a person on their birthday from the point of view of energies? Today, I am 69 years old. It's a beautiful date. Please tell us about it.
About your recent birthday. 6 and 9 are numbers of Shiva. Shiva is the source, the primary cause of everything. Everything begins with him, and everything ends with him as well when the moment of Mahapralaya comes. Birthdays personally mean nothing to me, because in my traditions, birthdays were not really considered at all. We had the topic of Jyotish, which is the ancient system of Indian astrology. There, yes, in that system, all of these things really matter, but since our ultimate goal is not to simply follow along the lines of fate, but rather, our goal is true and absolute freedom, then we make efforts to break free from our birthdays, from our from the fate that has been predetermined and prescribed for us, to break free from the influence of those planets, those structures, and those systems that affect us and tie us to this date. That's why a practicing person tries to consciously detach from all of this and instead aligns themselves with other rhythms of nature. On Navaratri and Shivaratri, they do this in order to best synchronize with these manifested energies, which are much more expansive and freer than we are, being here at this point.
After returning from doubles, the pain in my feet, especially the left one, sometimes goes away if my attention is on others. Should I continue the practice? I saw a yellow mist, warmth, tension. What is it? About the matrix. I feel heat, but I can't distinguish it. The heart center, the fifth gate, and the matrix.
When a person starts to accelerate their energy in the body, their physical body activates mechanisms of recovery and regeneration. And those specific areas that have been damaged during your life may start to hurt quite a lot, or they might ache, throb, or itch. Basically, if there haven't been any direct injuries to the body, then the entire capillary system, the vascular system, and the lymphatic system are gradually being restored. Accordingly, in the places where the most severe damage, blockages, or stagnation occurred, there will be pain at first. Here, you can simply raise your legs above your head and allow both lymph and blood to drain from there, letting these processes renew and pass more quickly. Well, otherwise, time heals. There's nothing you can do about it. The yellow fog is a manifestation of the body of second attention. It can manifest in all sorts of ways. Therefore, there's really no point in giving it any special significance. It's better to study this process. Immerse yourself in it, look for new aspects and new perceptions within it, and try to expand the range of your perception of this phenomenon as much as possible, rather than trying to pick apart just one thing about it. The body of second attention is extremely diverse. So far, only a part of its perception has appeared, and getting fixated on this part is completely pointless. The human matrix, well, basically I've told you the main things about it. As for what other masters talk about, it's easy to get confused by the terminology here. That's why my terminology is as simple as possible, and I try to explain every word. What other people mean by the same words is known only to those other people. So God only knows what anyone actually means. The human matrix is its universal ideal form, the form of the human body, of human energy. All people are created according to this form in its likeness. In other words, it is its template. Depending on how worthily a person has lived their life in relation to humanity, that's how bright it will be. That is the specific type of foundational template they will have. It is unconscious, it's simply a blank slate, a model. But its inner radiance and its powerful fire create many positive experiences. And in principle, it has a beneficial effect on the entire human field. Therefore, yes, the most correct and best approach is repeated practice. The more a person studies themselves, the more they direct their attention to these processes, and the more often this is repeated, the faster completely new worldviews are formed within them. And it is much more accurate than the previous one because it is already based on extrasensory perception.
Egregores influence up to level 108 via positive centers, but how about the negative ones?
Positive and negative centers are simply a way to talk about them. A person pierces the earth through with their own flow. That's why his flow emerges from one side of the earth and from the other side of the earth as well. And approximately up to the orbit of the moon, everything is populated by egregorial structures in all of this space. That's why we are squeezed in a vice from above and below. Another matter is how much influence they have on the lower part of our flow, how strong their impact is. Here, things are not so clear-cut. But the fact that we are squeezed from both sides is undeniable. That's why only those who have broken through either far down or far up manage to escape. Once you travel far beyond the outer radius of our moon's orbit, there is at least some relatively clean and empty space.
Why is it that during practice I catch myself dreaming, and at the same time, with my eyes open, I realize that it's a dream? Do I see both realities at once, the physical and the dream reality?
Yes, such a state does exist, and it's not even a beginner level anymore. This is where the first and second attention merge, and the more a person, the longer one can remain in this state, the better. If a person can simultaneously perceive and experience both the dream world and the real world, and even successfully manages to physically move their body without losing perception of the dream world, then the more complete and unified they will ultimately become. In any case, all practitioners go through this. All practitioners strive to unite the first and second attention, but if someone is already starting to succeed, that's wonderful.
Eye color, personal or the person next to you. Does it somehow affect energy? The speed of processes? Why are people different races? What's the meaning?
Well, you could say it does have an effect. It's more about energy. Energy has more of an influence than eye color does. Eye color can be an indicator. The brighter the color or the deeper and darker the color, for instance, things like deep black eyes or jet black hair, which are as dark as pitch. This can be an indicator of a rather high energetic potential in a person. This doesn't mean the person is good or bad. It just means they have a high potential. How they use it is up to the person themselves. So there are certain such signs. But as for why people are different races, well, that's really a rhetorical question. Why do people have two arms and why do people have two eyes? Why do people have... In other words, you could keep asking questions like this endlessly. But actually, I once came across a very interesting theory that the location on the planet determines racial characteristics, and that even if a person of one race lives in the territory of people of another race, then after several generations, they will have exactly the same features as the other race. In other words, they will lose the features of their own race. I don't know how true this is, because I've only lived for 41 years, and it's hard for me to judge. Well, I liked this theory at one time, and in principle, there is a certain logic to it. Because our reality, our world, is divided into sectors, and these sectors already determine physical characteristics. I just don't understand how this could help on the path of practice. Because in any case, even if we change our location on this planet, it will take several generations to live in order to acquire the traits of another race.
And how can this be used effectively, for yourself or to use it for those around you?
Well, how can this be used? Can it be used as an indicator? You look at a person, you look at their physical features, and you have some basic understanding, for example, of what might be happening in their energy, what state they're in. The only thing is that energy can change very quickly, while the physical body doesn't always keep up. So we can see some initial conditions that a person had from the beginning, and that's about it. But over the course of life, if a person works on themselves, if they develop themselves, their traits should also change. The best benefit is this. It's when a person practices and develops themselves. That's the main benefit. But when a person looks at others, they quarrel with their own soul. I've talked about this many times already.
What does your logo mean? A triangle with a dot inside.
Well, that's not my logo. It's the logo of a secret society. To be honest, it is not really appropriate for you to ask me what it means, because I was not the one who originally came up with it. But at the same time, if I take the specific knowledge I have, look at this logo and say what it resembles, then I can say that it is the center of the Shri Yantra. It is Maha Kameshwari, Maha Vajrashwari, Maha Abhagamalini, and the small dot in the middle of the triangle signifies the concept of Bindu, Shri or Tripura Sundari. That is, this is the part of the structure where a configuration is manifested that allows one to be absolutely independent from the original, in other words, to be its copy. In my understanding, this is very serious symbolism. But again, let me remind you, it does not belong to me. It belongs to someone else, so the owner of this symbol could probably tell you more about it.
When I or another practitioner develop several arms and faces, what does that mean? This has happened more than once.
This is the manifestation of the perception of multidimensionality, the parallel nature of the structure of our stream. Our stream has many physical bodies, and we can reach the perception of these physical bodies with our own, with our consciousness, with our attention. This speaks to the mobility of consciousness. It means that the processes of perceiving multidimensionality and perceiving one's body of second attention are beginning to manifest. And sometimes you can even see yourself performing several different unrelated actions simultaneously. Our nature is multidimensional, and the fact that we are able to observe this is wonderful. But that's another matter. You shouldn't stop at this, and you shouldn't assign it any particular significance. It's just like looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, well, yes, I have two eyes, here's my nose, and it has two nostrils. Wonderful, let's move on.
Remind me of the difference between the soul and consciousness.
What is called consciousness has no form. In the state of pure consciousness, we find the original, the root cause of everything, the source of all. You could say the creator, God, whatever you like. He has no form, but he still exists, and he exists as pure consciousness. When pure consciousness begins to take on forms, it also starts to form into the soul, among other things. That is, the soul is made up of consciousness, but the soul itself, it is already a kind of structured consciousness. The soul is multi-layered, and these layers, sooner or later, reach the state of a human being. A person has a personal soul, a person has a collective soul, and there are many, many layers all the way to the very origin. So the fundamental distinction to understand here is that pure consciousness represents the absolute original source, while the soul is already a series of specific and complex transformations of that source. And these transformations can be extraordinarily diverse and multifaceted in their nature.
What is the higher self in our system? Is it one of the layers of the soul?
When I talk about a certain word, I show it energetically. Yes, I show its exact location, the location of this word. The higher self, the soul, the divinity in the heart. And that Deva and Devi are all the same thing. All of this is located in a space that on the physical level is defined as being in the heart, on the energetic level. This is the bindu in the heart, and on the level of the body of second attention, it is actually a multidimensional process. It has there is no specific geometric location. As for what's out there on the internet, there's a lot of stuff. It's a mess, it's chaos. You can get lost there.
When I do the 5th lesson about the soul and the 5 divine qualities, I try to synchronize with the original, but I feel resistance. If I synchronize with my own fragment of consciousness, all 5 qualities respond. And also, memories of life situations. Does this resemble recapitulation?
This mostly happens because in our society, the attitude toward the original is like towards something alien, as if it's something entirely otherworldly, something we have no direct connection or physical contact with, and we need to perform all sorts of different actions just to somehow attract its attention. And because of this, even if you simply read the text, I adopt the specific position of synchronizing with my own fragment of consciousness. Personally, that phrase even grates on me because I am a fragment of consciousness. Not my fragment of consciousness, but I am a fragment of consciousness. This is precisely the reason why this internal psychological division and the energetic division as well are often perceived as these so-called spasms, which is to say, they represent a fundamental and deep-seated inability to function or flow naturally. To truly feel all of this. In other words, this connection itself is not some kind of action that we perform or effort we put in, but rather something we accept within ourselves, meaning we agree to it. We move away from the position of fragmentation. We move away from the position of a slave. We simply agree that we are a part of the original source, that this connection within us is indivisible, that these qualities are manifested in us. And after that, they begin to become accessible. But as long as a person remains in the position that, with their own fragment of consciousness, even that itself, this very formulation implies fragmentation. As for recalling life situations, yes, this is one form of conducting a review. It is one way of returning your consciousness back to yourself.
At university, I thought I had lost some money. I told people about it. Then in practice, I realized the money was at home. I couldn't admit it, even though I didn't feel guilty. In fact, it even felt warm and funny. All day I kept asking myself, why did this happen?
That's an interesting story, but I didn't get it. So did you end up finding the money or not? I suppose the money wasn't found. What can be said about this? A person can be mistaken, they can make errors, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. If someone is genuinely mistaken, it is not a problem at all. The real problem is that there's some kind of mental block that doesn't allow you to be genuinely mistaken. Let it be. This demand from yourself to always be right, always flawless, always perfect. But you're human, you're an irrational being, you can't always be right. So, the emphasis on not being able to admit it later, and that this became a reason for internal dialogue, well, here questions start to arise, like, why not? What was stopping you from saying, yes, I genuinely thought I lost them, and then I started to think about it. I reflected and suddenly remembered that, in fact, I hadn't lost them. There's nothing wrong with that. The fact that you managed to keep the fire in your heart is wonderful. It's truly wonderful when, in general, it doesn't go out. There are just too many thoughts about this, far too many. I mean, it happened, and that's that. You made a mistake, so what? In other words, this shouldn't be a reason for endless internal dialogue and a huge loss of energy. That's it. This is a situation to practice in. An absolutely safe situation. A situation that doesn't pose any problems. But even in training mode, some questions already came up about how to behave in this situation. It's another reason to adjust yourself and realize that it's one thing to understand and quite another to actually be inside the situation. That is how you act. But overall, it's fine. And by the way, that's good. There was an option to immediately complain about it to everyone. When you tell a lot of people about your problems, they dissolve very quickly. This works not only for problems too. So when you tell a lot of people about some stroke of luck, that luck also dissolves. You need to know that.
What about the emotions after a performance? They're overflowing and you can't sleep. You want to share, but it's late and everyone is asleep. Where should you direct that energy? What practice should you use?
Of course, with your own soul. Immerse yourself in that space. Focus deeply on the sacred bindu in your heart and rejoice, embracing your own inner divinity that resides there within you and within every person. This is truly the best possible option, which will multiply many times over and return to you as a beautiful wave of love from your very own soul.
What happens to a person on the eve of their birthday? For several years in a row now, I've been experiencing intense emotional upheaval before it. Sometimes I decide to quit my job, sometimes I cry for several days in a row.
Basically, people create stress for themselves because of their birthday. They mostly create a fuss, get jittery, and experience some kind of panic states. Why does this happen? Because you have to fuss, you have to invite guests, do all sorts of absolutely pointless things. That is complete nonsense. But since that is the local custom, it frequently tends to happen in childhood, in youth. And even as a full-grown adult, a person still tries to pull off something quite similar to that. So for a person, it's a source of stress. And when, throughout their life, this time is always associated with a stressful situation, they start reacting to it in advance. For example, I don't celebrate my birthdays at all. At some point, I said, Mom, Dad, thank you, but I don't need this anymore. I don't want it. Because all this fuss, this hustle and bustle, all of it is completely unnatural. It was always some kind of emergency. Something was always going wrong. We were buying things in a rush. At some point, I said, no, the gifts aren't worth it. By then, I was already learning how to earn money, and I just didn't want that fuss in my life anymore. Later, over time, when I already Connected my life with tradition. There, no one celebrated birthdays at all. For a practicing person, that's a normal process. So I can advise you as well. Just stop doing it and that's it. And your psyche will recover.
In the whirlwind in the womb, I feel a counterclockwise rotation. Previously, there would appear a column, a strong attraction. Is the ray of intention more pronounced in men? There was disappointment. Now I'm waiting for the feeling of bliss to return.
Yes, at first, the whirlwind in the womb can be perceived as a movement counterclockwise. But over time, you manage to reach the clockwise movement as well. Our vortex spins in both directions at the same time. The movement that goes counterclockwise is more related to the processes of departure. From here, a transition into the third attention. And the clockwise direction is the movement of energy if you are still ready to immerse yourself in illusions, into all sorts of situations, events, and to keep being active in this world. The fact that men have a more pronounced ray of intention than women, statistically, yes. Although there are always nuances, there are particularities, a lot happens in our everyday lives. So this is not an axiom, it's just a certain statistical tendency. And naturally, there are exceptions to it. In order for bliss to return, you shouldn't wait for it. When a person waits, most often they simply end up running out of time. Bliss is not found in the vortex or in intention, bliss is found in our heart. And for the heart to open, you need to move toward your heart, not wait for it to open on its own. This is a completely different way of life, a completely different self-awareness. It is in the heart that the divinity resides, the masculine manifestation. They are the most beautiful, the most perfect, and they always love simply. Most people don't pay attention to this. But it is precisely with deeply focused, unwavering, and undistracted attention that one can finally attain and experience their own divinity within the heart. And this is the essence of true, eternal bliss, which is completely safe, which will never run away or demand anything, and which is always cherished and deeply loved.
During the immersion, I saw a sign at the top of a pillar of fire and a little dancer moving in circles, quickly and gracefully. Was that Shakti? Fantastic. I believe in miracles.
Yes, one way or another, people can notice the structures of yantra within themselves. These yantra structures are organized precisely from the energy of Shakti. That's why when a person sees this mandala called the Shri Yantra, they respond to it as if to something. Very sacred depths. We are subconsciously all-seeing, but sometimes a person does not let this knowledge into their consciousness. And it becomes necessary to help them with this, that is, to be a conduit for this knowledge, to clarify, explain, and make it accessible, which is exactly what I do.
Have you ever drawn parallels between the Yantra tradition and the Slavic pantheon? And is it possible to use Slavic terminology for simplicity? Is it possible to integrate your knowledge into the Slavic framework, considering that these practices are connected to a worldview?
The pantheon of gods, there's Veles, Svarog, Perun. On the one hand, it's all essentially the same. But on the other hand, I haven't come across one. A bearer of Slavic knowledge, capable of transmitting it on the level of settings, on the level of energy. I searched in this direction. I looked for people capable of passing on this knowledge, but I didn't find such people. And since I am completely unfamiliar with Slavic terminology, with Slavic teachings, I simply can't draw parallels either. I'm just not able to make those connections myself. And since now I am already completely and fully immersed in Sanskrit, the Vedas, and Tantra, basically, I no longer have such desires. Because the stage of jnana, meaning jnana is when you still need detailed explanations, when you need to read books, and when you need to draw knowledge without the help of energy. That stage I have already passed. I have already gone through that stage. And as of today, I no longer read anything, I don't study anything, I simply direct all my attention into the practices that I have mastered. And I continue to develop myself in the direction that allows me to realize my intention. Now, I no longer have, let's say, either the desire or the opportunity to immerse myself in jnana again, for the sake of simplicity and understanding Slavic terminology. But we don't have Slavic culture. What kind of simplicity of perception can there be? We had the Soviet Union where all of this was completely forbidden, and then we witnessed the rise of Christianity, which, by the way, in its essence also encompasses and reflects absolutely real fundamental truths and absolutely correct processes. Of course, they are now very much distorted by modern views. But if you still abstract yourself from these modern perspectives and truly try to feel the deep essence of these texts, the essence there, especially what Jesus said, it was actually conveyed quite accurately. No, we do not have Slavic culture, so I do not see how that would make things any easier for us. Just a guy from the village, he most likely wants money, not energy. Let's be honest. All I can do is recommend that you get into this yourself and use the skills and mastery that are revealed in the process of practice for this. I don't see that path of development for myself.
Centers of feeling. I don't feel them yet. Why don't they all open up? Today I felt anger. I want to scream silently. Is it okay to have a little wine at a birthday party?
There isn't really a direct ban on alcohol, but you still need to look at what kind of product it is. If it's a chemical product, well, it's probably not very good, and in principle shouldn't be consumed, not because it's alcohol, but because it's a bad product. If the alcohol is of good quality, then why not? There are no problems or restrictions here, at least not in my tradition. How can you feel an energy center? When the very center starts to ignite, you may actually begin to perceive a small bump or a distinct funnel on the surface of the body, right there in the middle. And these funnels or bumps, no matter how you sense them, can be felt with your fingers. That is, you can simply move your hand along the center line on the surface of the body. And in the places where the energy centers emerge, your hand will move slightly away. Or on the contrary, it may be drawn toward the body, depending again on the individual's unique characteristics. In this way, you can literally feel them, in the truest sense of the word. Anger is not the best reaction. Rage is much more interesting. The difference between anger and rage, the difference is that when a person is angry, they tense up, but when they're in a rage, they explode. All reactions that involve, on the contrary, fiery states, they are tense, but in principle, they are acceptable. The main thing is to make sure these reactions don't have inertia. That is, as soon as the situation is resolved, that's it, you're harmonious and calm again.
During the practice, the Kundalini serpent suddenly awakened, burned me, as if it were offended. Then it began to rise easily up to the heart and the throat. Question: to what level should it rise, and how should it settle there?
The Kundalini energy is definitely recognized. But the Kundalini energy is, in its very essence, you. Therefore, if a person tends to be deeply offended at themselves, to throw ashes on their own head, to oppress themselves, to torment themselves, accordingly, these reactions can be clearly observed in one's own energy. Kundalini should move freely. It should fill all the channels throughout the entire flow. It is a serpent that bites its own tail. That is, having gone infinitely upward, it returns from infinity below. Then the entire flow will acquire a very interesting, such a glow, a very peculiar radiance. That's why you don't need to force it anywhere in particular, as I've said many times before. But you should allow it to move infinitely upward and infinitely downward. And that is exactly what is needed. In general, the energy of Kundalini is what, at the level of the abdomen, is called a vortex, Shakti in the womb. It's the same energy. One name is manifested at the physical level, and the other name is manifested around the ray of intention. And accordingly, if this vortex rises along the entire ray of intention, then naturally it comes from below.
The practice is going well. No allergies. Blood pressure is normal. The space has become calmer, desires are being fulfilled, but my kidneys have started to ache a little. What could this mean?
It is common for your kidneys to ache during significant drops in your energy levels, which typically happens when stress appears. This stress often arises from maintaining an incorrect worldview or a flawed perspective on life. Accordingly, as long as there are some pain points, there are certain moments where the reaction is rather inhibiting, causing spasms. These are the reactions. A spasm occurs immediately, energy drops, and as a sign, as an impulse, there is pain in the kidneys. Also, the kidneys are connected, so to speak, to sexual intemperance. but not in the sense that you can't have sex, but rather that you shouldn't go overboard in this regard. Especially considering that prostatitis has gone away, you could, so to speak, lose all restraint and go overboard. In general, less stress is better. Keep sexual activity in balance and try not to overexert yourself. By the way, stress can also include things like jumping into an ice hole. For example, after a sauna, that's also a form of stress. So stress isn't always psychological, there can be physical stresses as well.
How often should you do the practices? Per day? Per week?
You need to live in a state of practice. We only do practices to figure out how things are arranged and how everything works. And then a new sense organ appears called extrasensory perception. And with this profound sense, we live out our entire lives and try to develop it as much as we possibly can. So practice is certainly a good thing, but it's not really something that makes sense to force into a very strict and rigid schedule. You should strive to always be perceptive, to constantly feel the flow of the energy, and to always observe the movements, even if it is just in the fingertips, the subtle movement of energy there. Personally, my own meditation practice, once it first began many years ago, has truly never really stopped since that day.
After the 12-12 practice, my chest burned. The next day, my pancreas hurt. I did it on an empty stomach. What should I do in case of such reactions? Should I continue practicing or take a break?
Emergency measures are very simple and straightforward. Sometimes you need to let your body breathe out. As I say, there should be a balance between pleasures and your spiritual development. When the physical body starts to hurt excessively and can no longer cope with the intensity of these practices, you can just spend a day or 2 or 3 doing various things that bring you a deep sense of pleasure and relaxation. Simple, understandable enjoyment, human without any spirituality involved. Throughout this specific period, your body will balance itself out, fully recover, and gradually get used to the much more intense energetic processes. Then you can continue your practices once again. You should alternate like this until the first attention and the second attention merge together. Then everything will be trained as a whole. So sometimes you need to take a break if your body's already signaling that it's too much.
How does eating sweets affect the flow of energy?
It hinders the movement of energy. The more sweets a person consumes, the harder it is for them to accelerate energy flows through their physical body. So it acts like a demotivator.
Until you set course, find your path, practice helps soften it. Question: if there's a cat next to you during practice, is it okay or is it harmful for the cat?
Everything has its time. And thinking is actually harmful in general. As for the cat, well, my cat practices too. There were times when my practices made him feel bad. But gradually, he got used to it, adapted. Now, no matter what practice I do, he feels fine, mostly sleeps somewhere nearby, curled up in a ball.
Pain in the lower chakras. I hadn't heard about them before. Does this mean I'm not following my own path? And my knees? A lack of repentance. The steps are being polished, but I agree to awareness, not to suffering.
The lower energy centers of the body are mainly responsible for the entire skeletal system, for the joints, for how a person maintains their physical balance while walking, and for how firmly they stand on their own 2 feet. For example, you can look at a wrestler, or someone who has practiced Sambo or Aikido, where there are many throws, and look at a person who has been doing all of this for more than 20 years. And you can see that it's as if he's rooted into the ground. That is, his ability to stand on his feet is almost otherworldly. And it is precisely these effects, these manifestations, that the lower centers are responsible for. That's why it's obvious that when work with these energies began, the body immediately responded. At the level of the bones, at the level of the joints. And when the body is activated, it begins to regenerate and recover. And when it recovers, it hurts. So this is an absolutely natural process, and there is really nothing to worry about here.
What should you do if, during chakra practice, your arms and legs are unbearably twisted? It's impossible to endure, especially in the -1st and -2nd centers.
Yes, I have experienced such processes myself. It's not just that they twist, sometimes even the surface of the skin loses sensitivity or starts to turn red, like with a sunburn. All of this happens because the physical body cannot withstand the energetic potential that the practices unlock. Here you can either take a short break for a day, 2 or 3, and wait until your body adapts, until it adjusts, until it gets used to these energies. Or you can stand under the shower, take a contrast shower, or just soak yourself in a warm shower, simply wash it off yourself. This helps to wash away the excess energetic manifestation so that it becomes easier for your body. Sometimes it was so intense for me that I would even go outside and just lower my hands up to my elbows in the snow, just to somehow balance it all out. See for yourself, basically. Both ways are equally effective. You can use water, you can even lie in the bathtub. Just make sure the water isn't stagnant, but that it flows a little. That is, you can turn the water on a little and slightly open the drain so the water moves. And you can simply take breaks and pauses during the exercises.
In which direction should you visualize the vortex spinning in the uterus, or does it not matter?
We don't visualize anything at all. Visualization is a complete miss right away. We can make up anything we want and start believing in it. But in reality, it won't exist at all. That's why we listen intently, sense deeply, observe, become aware, perceive, and search for deeper meaning. For example, in the closed practitioners club, I demonstrated a lazy practice where you don't expect anything at all, you don't anticipate anything, you simply direct your attention to the lower part of your abdomen and just keep your attention there. And everything that manifests there, everything that is felt there, gradually starts to form into some kind of picture of the world. At the same time, the person doesn't do anything except keep their attention still. Try practicing this way. But this visualization, this mental imagining, is a bottomless pit from which you might never escape.
How can you tell what is energy? Has Shakti reached the 6th center and awakened Shiva? What comes before that?
The energy of Shiva is the ray of intention. Here the 6th center has nothing to do with it at all. And the energy of Shakti is the vortex that spins around the ray of intention. So the energy of Shakti is a vortex in the womb. And the ray of intention is Shiva. And the vortex spins along the entire length of the ray of intention. So there's really nothing to understand here, in principle. A person simply observes these processes within themselves. But when the energy of Shiva merges with the energy of Shakti, a person attains the body of light. So when your physical body transforms into a body of light, that means Shakti has awakened Shiva. That's how you know.
At what time, Moscow time, do you usually answer questions? Or does it happen at any time?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about. For example, today at 8 p.m. Moscow time, we'll have a broadcast in the closed practitioners club. For a complete hour, we will be training, exercising hard, and performing various specific practices that thoroughly prepare us for the upcoming 3rd stage. Whenever we have scheduled filming sessions of questions and answers. We do a live broadcast in the Telegram channel, and there I talk to people and answer their questions. There's no set schedule for this. That is, whenever there's time to do it, we do it, and an announcement is made. In the Anton Mikhailov Telegram channel, for example, right now I'm talking. So this also isn't regulated by any schedule. If I get the chance to talk and answer questions, I do it. So I'm answering now. Before this, literally, I don't know, maybe for about 2 weeks, I just physically didn't have the opportunity to answer questions. Now that I have the chance, I answer right away. So if we're talking about a schedule, that only applies to the closed club. Everything else is chaotic.
I've done the 2nd lesson for a month. I don't feel centers 1 through 5. Negatives hit, but I'm adjusting. 6th and 7th. Okay, the area between my eyebrows is weak. Should I move on or continue with the 2nd one?
You need to practice the first 3 modules in a circle. That is the 1st module, the 2nd module, the 3rd module. Again, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And keep developing your mastery, keep building your skills. This way, you can achieve very high effectiveness in your practices. And just staying in one place and hammering away at a single point, this option also exists, but let's be honest, a person gets tired of this approach very quickly. That's why you need to diversify your practice. You need to reach practices related to the gates. This will give you an additional resource, and that extra resource will allow you to progress much faster, to release, relax, and absorb all of this within yourself.
In the 1st lesson, you feel the breath in your hands, a gentle swaying of the body. When should you move on to the next one? Is it possible to do different lessons in one day? The manual is empty.
All three modules can be done sequentially and in a cycle. We are developing skills, what I showed there, those exercises. The more you do these exercises, the more proficient you will eventually become at them. For that reason, all three modules can be done sequentially, in any order, completely mixed up, or in whatever way you personally prefer. This will be very effective.
The first module. How do you know which practices to do and how often?
It's very easy to determine, just as needed. I describe each energetic process and how we use it in our daily lives. Accordingly, the vulnerable areas in your life that you want to address, those are the practices you need to do to cover those weak spots. Centers are about interaction with the external world. Gates are sources, resources. They are imbued with certain qualities. The very first and most fundamental elements of encountering the reality of death are all essential practices that provide a truly complete and holistic awareness of oneself. However, since we all have our everyday, ordinary days, these practices can be distributed in such a way that these days become much more pleasant, effective, and truly harmonious. Well, in practice, you need to do all these exercises. As long as you do the exercises, you keep improving. How do you know when you no longer need to improve yourself? Your body transforms into energy, into pure energy. That's how you know you can finish with the practices.
The pillar is the manifestation of Shiva, around which the vortex of Shakti spins. What happens to it when we lie down horizontally?
If we perceive ourselves through the physical body, then the pillar lies down with us. If we perceive ourselves through the body of second attention, then this pillar does not move at all. The only thing is, it wobbles a little bit in space. That is, relative to the second attention, we don't move at all. But relative to the physical body, yes, it somehow magically spins together with the physical body. And it tilts and it bends, and overall it all looks quite amusing. This is what multidimensionality is.
How can we accelerate or generate the zone of sincerity through energy?
We can accelerate it simply by directing our attention there, by doing the practice I showed. But if, after finishing this practice, a person goes back to living their old life as usual, they immediately flush all the results of the practice down the drain. For the zone of sincerity to always shine, you need to stop lying completely, forever. And first and foremost, stop lying to yourself. And only a brave person can do that. Sincerely.
With our fourth center, are we attached to the ray of intention, which is positioned vertically, and do we change our position in space arbitrarily around this point?
Yes, the fourth center is our main one. In fact, we revolve around it. And that's why it would be logical to call it the zero center and count upwards and downwards from it. But in order to avoid creating even more confusion in all of this, it is left exactly as it is. However, the perception, in principle, matches up with reality.
I wasn't invited to the company party. I didn't want to go anyway. They went, and a couple of days later, they were just as aggressive toward each other as before. Situations like this used to bother me, being on the sidelines, but now there's no resentment.
And what resentment could there be if your wish came true? On the contrary, you should be happy when your wishes come true so easily. After all, no one stopped you from generating the desire to go instead. And I'm more than sure that would have come true as well.
If you hold your tongue in Kachari Mudra and direct your eyes upward, does that help energetically? With incomplete Kachari, there is a sensation of a column between the tongue and the crown of the head.
Definitely, this tongue position helps. It allows you to concentrate your attention better and makes it easier to observe the flowing energies, the energies moving through the channels. On the other hand, I personally know someone who went to surgeons to have his frenulum cut so he could move his tongue all the way back there, really far. He hoped that he would immediately become enlightened and turn into a god. Watching him, I didn't see any changes at all, even though he did have his tongue's frenulum cut. Don't fool yourself into thinking that by moving the physical body, we'll instantly receive all revelations and all the results of the practices. No. But by moving the physical body, we can make energetic practices easier for ourselves. That is exactly what practicing yoga is for, along with all sorts of different mudras, and all of these practices have a certain beneficial and lasting effect on your overall well-being. But this is not the decisive factor. The most critical and decisive factor is the ability to masterfully control your attention, to manage your focus and direct it exactly where you need it, without letting it get distracted by other processes. And, by the way, touching the tip of the tongue to the roof of the mouth also significantly helps you to disconnect from the physical body more effectively. But connecting the tip of the tongue to the roof of the mouth does not disconnect you from the physical body, so this distinction shouldn't be overlooked.
What are the functions of the minus third and second centers? My legs are twisting, pulling, my body wants to move. After changing position, it lets go. With greater concentration, the pulling sensations intensify.
The minus centers are directly responsible for the health of our bones and joints, the essential capacity to maintain balance, the ability to stand firmly and steadily on our feet, and not to fall during sea voyages or when you happen to slip. These minus centers are very well developed in various wrestlers and Aikido practitioners. In general, in those sports where you need to stand confidently on your feet. These energies, in fact, are responsible for that. That's why when your legs start twisting, pulling and shifting, and all these processes related to that, essentially, that is precisely what is occurring in the moment. In those areas where these energies are manifesting, it is highly probable that they were previously unused. So the body needs some time to adapt to the significantly faster and much more intense flow of these vibrations through the person.
Which gates are responsible for communication? After the first experience with the gates, communication intensified as if I became a magnet.
Here, it all depends on what effects each gate produces. For example, the first gates can scare you to death, while the fifth ones can harmonize you. Well, basically, in the first course, I described what effects each of the gates creates. And accordingly, by focusing on these effects, you can create communication with people. These are holes in space. How can they be tied to communication? They can't really be tied to communication, but they do create effects. Money matters are well resolved by activating the third gates, for example.
How do you manifest energies according to the flow?
Depending on the level at which the energy center is located, it manifests in all directions, including upward and downward. To manifest it according to the flow means to release it and allow it to shine as broadly as possible, to the extent that it is possible at all. Potentially, all of this leads to a single fiery pillar of energy.
If I can't see energies, will the pillar work as effectively for me as it does for those who can see?
If there is no vision, then there must be feeling. But if there is no feeling, then it will be problematic. Feeling can easily substitute for visual perception. And sometimes, through feelings, a person can move much more efficiently and quickly, because in order to see, you have to significantly change your state of consciousness. But to feel, you generally don't need to do anything at all. You just start feeling. But perception definitely needs to be there. Without any sensory perception, it will be problematic to actually notice the presence of the fiery pillar.
What is the difference between meditating lying down and sitting?
When a person meditates lying down, there is a higher chance of falling asleep. But in general, if we consider the movement of energy, then besides us, there is also the planet, and energy moves within our planet as well. If we shift our physical position in space relative to the planet, or if we alter the orientation of our physical body in space, we can either significantly enhance our processes or fall out of sync. That is exactly why most meditation practices are performed in a seated position, so that the energetic flows coming from the planet can pass through the body, and everything moves in the same direction. If a person lies down, the flows end up moving in slightly different directions.
Everyone is getting results. Cool. I've been practicing for more than half a year. Nothing but silence. Maybe you have some advice?
It's impossible for there to be complete silence. It's just that what you feel and what you are aware of, you filter out in your perception. You have a certain idea of how it should be, how it's supposed to be, but this idea doesn't match reality. That's why you get the illusion that nothing is working. I've been saying quite often lately that any practitioner should approach this like a researcher, without any preconceived notions about how it should be. You need to let go of your own ideas, stop filtering your perception, and start perceiving everything you are able to perceive. And gradually, as this perception extends beyond the boundaries of the physical body, you begin to realize that this is what energy is. If a person first imagines something and then starts looking for it, they can spend a very long time searching for what they've made up.
Is there a practice to fall asleep faster?
Everyone below is giving the right advice. You need to observe your energy centers above the 9th, the 10th, 11th, 12th, and as many more as you like. But you really need to perceive this honestly. Not just pretending to perceive, but actually feeling it. And when a person starts doing this, they fall asleep very quickly.
By what signs can you tell that the practice with implants was successful?
The signs are very simple. The implants stop getting inflamed, hurting, or distracting you from the practice in any way. In other words, they become part of the body. But the most important sign that the practice was successful is this. For a person who is sensitive to energy, to extrasensory perception, usually one time is enough.
After practicing Rajkachari Mudra, I feel a heaviness on my head, as if I'm wearing a helmet. When working with the 6th center, I experience intense tingling sensations.
These are nothing more than spasms, crystalline structures that prevent energy from moving freely. The fact that a person doesn't feel them in a normal state doesn't mean they aren't there. When a practitioner begins to accelerate their energy, the intensified energy starts to stumble over these structures and they become noticeable. Sometimes this helmet can undergo a transformation into a kind of crown or a ring, and for some time it can create a significant amount of interference with practice, even physically squeezing the head. All of these are restrictive structures, and sooner or later they eventually burn away and dissolve. Periodically, a person creates them again, simply because they are used to doing so. But if you observe these processes in everyday life, you will quite simply see how you do this, what exactly you do, what actions, behaviors, thoughts, and emotions you have that restore this ring around your head, which is also perceived as a helmet. All of this is tension and spasms. One way or another, a practicing person gets rid of them. Simply put, the less often you restore all of this, the faster it all disappears.
At the exhibition, the 6th center was activated. It often gets activated in crowded places. Maybe it picks up on people with abilities? And then the battery burst, a jet shot upwards, splashing everything.
The 6th center is precisely responsible for information flows. And the 6th center gets overloaded if there are too many information flows. When a lot of people gather, they're thinking about something, they're reflecting on things, they might be talking to each other, and this wave of information flows one way or another, affects the area around the 6th center. If a person doesn't want to be affected by this, if they want to remain solely in their own state, then the center flares up and burns through these flows. In other words, it maintains balance this way. And when we study something, when we direct our attention ourselves to receive information, the whole area around the head, the 6 gates, and the 6th center are also activated. And that's why it feels like an energy manifestation. The fact that the heating system burst is definitely a sign, but this sign is meant exclusively for you, because signs are mostly individual. And from a distance, from the other side of the planet, it would be very difficult for me to guess what exactly it could mean. In general, when water breaks through, it usually means the old is leaving and the new is coming. But that's just a statistical observation, and at this moment you need to be as open and active as possible and not be afraid of anything.
While practicing lying down, my right hand and nearby areas get goosebumps. My whole body feels cold. What is this?
This person is feeling this coldness that is entering their body. This means that consciousness is flowing into them, consciousness that is coming through the gate. The fact that you get goosebumps means that in this part of the body, consciousness is catching on something. In other words, there is some resistance there to the inflow of this consciousness. Over time, this all goes away. It passes rather quickly. In general, the most sensitive parts of the body imply that they have the greatest number of constricting structures. Where the body has no resistance, a person may not feel anything at all. Don't confuse this with the process when nothing flows into you, and that is why you feel nothing. If you feel cold, it means something is flowing in. If you get goosebumps, it means something is catching there, something hasn't quite adapted yet and isn't ready.
If I come home and the practice has already started, should I do it later or in the morning? Will the recording on GetCourse be available immediately or later? I'm going to have a post put in my molar. What material should I ask for the post to be made of? Is it possible to repeat the practice with Shiva and set the intention for a successful activation and permission to leave work early?
To start by answering the very first question, well, in this situation, you should really try your absolute best to be present for the practice session in any way possible. Even if it is just having a single earbud in your ear while the broadcast is playing, that is already quite good. Our first introductory practice will be focused much more on the essential preparatory work, so if you find that you can't be fully present for it, that's not a problem. It's not something you need to worry about missing. But it is significantly better to be present, at the very least for the sake of audio perception, to properly synchronize with our field, which will begin to form right from the very first moment of the process. The recording of the course will most likely be uploaded within a day. Regarding the tooth, well, that's a complicated question. As for which material is better to use, let the doctor decide because, as they say, he knows best. And what should be done about it? There is a practice available for revitalizing foreign objects inside your body, so you can make use of this practice. This course is currently available on the GetCourse platform, and there really shouldn't be any major problems after that point. In general, if it is possible to use ceramic material, it is definitely better, of course, to go with ceramics. Although using metal isn't a big problem for you either. The practice we did on the 5th, for the affirmation of intention, is simply a powerful technique. You can use it whenever you want, so it never loses its relevance or its value in your life. The only difference is that now you'll be doing it without my support, that is, on your own. That's the only difference. Otherwise, of course, it's relevant at any time, in any period, and at any age. It's just a technique. How exactly can you make reality hear you?
Does activation of the gates mean interacting with them more often?
By activation, we mean that we open them at a specific moment in time and observe the movement of streams of consciousness. When a person initially stops keeping their attention on the gates, they close. Therefore, just because a person practiced the gates in the morning, it doesn't mean that everything will work for them during the day. Most likely, all these processes will have already stopped by the afternoon. Only over time do they stabilize and start working on a regular, ongoing basis. So no, you need to manifest them precisely at the moment of interacting with other people.
When I practice with my eyes open, the space gets shrouded in fog. What is that?
With open eyes, a person can see the etheric field around them. It is quite dense, white, and can be perceived as flashes or flickers. Next, they see the web of their own cocoon, through which it is very difficult to see anything beyond. In other words, to look through it. And as you move further away from the physical body, you may simply see the glow of your own field. It can also have pale, subtle shades of whitish-orange. That's why, upon initial observation, it may be easily perceived by the viewer as a kind of mist. But essentially, this is the etheric field, this is the cocoon, and this is the glow of a person, the glow of their field.
What should those do whose practice falls in the middle of the night because of the time difference? Will we still be in the shared field?
You know, throughout the entire course of their lives, many people often while away their time, spending countless sleepless nights watching an endless repetitive stream of news and TV series that have absolutely no real significance. But sometimes a unique situation arises where it's not just a matter of passing the time, but rather a vital, necessary step that you truly need to ascend to reach the next level. And when a person is just passing the time and spending sleepless nights over some nonsense, they don't ask themselves, what should I do? Like, what should I do because it's night outside and I'm bothered by some thought that in 3 months will mean absolutely nothing to me. So what should you do? There's nothing to do. A person just spends a sleepless night, that's all. And they don't even ask themselves what on earth they're doing right now. But for some reason, when it comes to practices, to transformation, to change, to things that some people work toward for years or even decades, suddenly the question arises, oh, but how can this be? It's night outside, and we're supposed to practice. Go and practice. It's a matter of priorities. It's a matter of what you live for. For example, I never had any questions when Ashan held practices from midnight until morning. These practices were connected to the Navaratri festival. For 9 days and 9 nights, people practice continuously and don't worry at all about the fact that it's night outside. So you can do whatever you want. But I'll repeat once more. What are your priorities? What is more important to you? Just to get some sleep? Which is what people do throughout their entire lives one way or another. Or perhaps you will find some inner willpower deep within yourself and choose to do this practice in perfect sync with me right now. By the way, I should mention that I am also in a different time zone right now, and I am definitely not living on Moscow time at all.
Does the fire really burn through egregorial connections, or did it just seem that way?
Any rapidly accelerated energy is capable of burning through egregorial connections. But if a person restores their energy again, then, accordingly, all the egregores will return as well, if the person is still susceptible to certain very rigid positions that are approved by groups in society.
While practicing, my ears itch a lot, like someone's rummaging inside. Are channels opening?
What? Well, it's not just the ears. Sometimes your whole body starts to itch. Sometimes it's right under the skin, as if, I don't know, elephants are running around in there. Well, not elephants, of course, but basically all sorts of little creatures are running around. Sometimes something really burns. Sometimes it shoots through you. All of this is a conglomerate of effects from the manifestation of energy. Mostly, it's in areas where there's increased sensitivity, that is heightened physical sensitivity, where there are some spasms, tension, basically, where some problems have already started to accumulate. And since the energy burns through and washes away these problems, well, it also manifests in some way on the physical level. That's why any practitioner goes through this, and goes through it many times. For example, when they've been practicing, then for some reason they fall off, live an ordinary life for a while, and then suddenly wake up and start practicing again. All these effects come back again. Someone feels like something is crawling on them, something itches, something burns, or something shoots right through them. So, every single one of these effects is due to the gradual washing away of restrictive structures by extremely high-speed energies. That is exactly why it happens this way.
For the 108 centers, the beam of intention bends downward but stays straight up. Why is that?
This means that your consciousness begins to leave the physical body and you stop perceiving the surrounding reality solely within the confines of the material world. In reality, there are no straight lines in the universe at all. Within this space, there are intricate patterns, vortices, and flows, and the more we withdraw our conscious attention from the physical body, the less we are aware of our physical body. The fewer sensory impulses we receive from our physical body, the less materially we perceive the energetic component of reality. That's why when a person dives very deeply into practice, they find reality to be completely different from how they are used to seeing it from the physical body.
95% of people don't even realize that within them lies a power that grants access to any possibility, a successful business, strong relationships, health, and self-fulfillment. It allows you to hear your soul and remember your true nature, your divine nature. This power is your energy. When it is blocked, you feel tired and upset. But when your energy flows freely and without obstacles, you are full of strength and capable of achieving any goal. Everyone can feel the movement of energy in their body. Are you ready to see this for yourself right now? I've prepared a practice where, in just 3 minutes, you'll become aware of the state of your energy and be able to activate the inner power that has been blocked for many years. The practice is available for a limited time. Right now, follow the link provided below the video and unlock the incredible source of power within yourself.